Your Honor, my client did not intend to commit the crime. Really, that's not a great entrance. It's really just an excuse for me to talk about the concept of intent today. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick, and I had occasion earlier today to think about the intent behind what people do. People's intention as they go about their day, as they flit through their day. Why is this so important? Why is this something that I want to talk about today? Well, first of all, nothing on this podcast is important, and nothing on this podcast should be taken as important. If you come to this podcast looking for important things that you must hear to understand, and things that you must hear from me to understand, you are in the incorrect place. I am not someone important, nor am I somebody whose word must be taken as gospel. In fact, there are very few people whose word should be taken as gospel. I've had 4 cups of coffee today. I'm quite energetic, so you'll have to excuse me. Anyways, but the concept of intent is very important, and it's not just important in the actual legal world where there are definitions of intent. Now, in the legal world, we know that the importance of intent has to go to the severity of a crime. Now, I'm specifically talking about the severity of crimes in the civil litigation world, where there are not criminal penalties, but there are some sort of financial consequences. I don't know that intent comes up so much because usually it has more to do with the occurrence of an event. For example, in the criminal world, if it so occurs that you trip and fall into my knife while I am stabbing you, but I did not intend to stab you, I am not necessarily imputed unless the prosecution can prove that I had the intent to cause you to trip and fall into my knife. It is a very extreme example, but it illustrates the point better than most things. Another easy example. You're walking through a store and something falls into your bag. You walk out the front of the store without realizing you stole something. You did not intend to steal anything, though you did commit the crime of stealing based on the definition of stealing. Okay, so in the legal world, we know that intent is very important to understand, and it's very important to define, and it's very important to prove facts that prove or disprove the existence of intent. Fine. But what about in the layperson world? I'm going to say the layperson world, because God, we love imputing intent to people. We just love assuming what someone was thinking when they do something. For example, let's move from somebody tripping and falling onto my knife to something far less consequential. Why didn't he or she answer my text message? Why didn't he or she answer my text message? Again, I say he or she encompass the full range of genders that you subscribe to in that statement. I'm not an expert on the sheer number of genders or pronouns that exist nowadays. For me to attempt to list them off would be somewhat silly, and you'd think I was making fun of you. I am not intending, there's that intent word again. I'm not intending to make fun of anyone today. People will be made fun of. It will come up spontaneously. I have no intent coming into this podcast to make fun of people today. The only people I make fun of with righteous intent are the people who choose to go out and buy themselves a lime green Maserati. Stop doing that. Why? What are you going to do with a lime green Maserati? Even if it's street legal, it's not as cool as you think it is. In fact, it's not as cool as anybody ever thought it was. It works in the Fast and Furious movies for maybe 5 seconds before it gets quite obnoxious. And if you don't drive on a racetrack all the time, why in the world are you buying it? You cannot accidentally buy a Maserati. You intended to buy it, bringing us back around to the question of imputing people's intention. Now, let's pick apart the joke I just made, because we can do that. Now, if you come into possession of a lime green Maserati, I can assume that you had an intent to possess a lime green Maserati, or at the very minimum, you intended to possess a Maserati without intention as to its color. Even if you didn't intend for a lime green Maserati, you intended the Maserati. Why? Well, because I don't know anybody who's ever woken up and had a $100,000 car or several $100,000 car sitting in their driveway accidentally, unless there was an accidental delivery, maybe. I suppose theoretically that world does exist. But let's go back to our example of the text message. When we don't get that text message response, or we don't get the call back, we immediately, our brain wants to make sense of it, wants to make sense of why, and this leads to the final conclusion, so it's a little bit of a spoiler, but our brain wants to make sense of why the text message hasn't come back, why they haven't responded. And here's the kicker. We impute intent because we believe there always must be a reason. There must be a reason why I did not receive that message back. There must be a reason why this event occurred. And so, to develop that reason, we impute intent onto other parties with no facts necessarily to support that. Or even if we have facts that could lead to a conclusion, we have nothing definitive. Unless somebody has actually said to you, I hate you, I will never respond to a text message you send to me ever again. And if you send me a text message, I have opened it up in front of all of my friends and I have laughed at you with them. I have laughed at your expense with them. You have no idea what the person is thinking who does not respond to that text message. It could be perhaps that their shoes were too tight. It could be that their head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be, the most likely reason of all, that their heart is 3 sizes too small. Yes, I did just bring the Grinch into this because the Grinch the rhymes are timeless. Anyways, why am I harping on this? Why am I harping on this sort of importance of understanding that oftentimes we impute intent that's not there? Well, that's because, what I said, we need in our minds to justify the occurrence of an incident. We need to justify in our minds the occurrence of an incident. If something happens, good or bad, somebody must have caused it, or it must have been caused by something. And if we can impute intent, we can then impute the chain of causation and start to impute fault. Now, this is purely in the lay world. When you enter into a courtroom, these are the sorts of things that are ferreted out, that you go down the fact-finding mission to find. And what you typically find is that, especially in like a criminal court, for example, you can't even say it with 100% certainty in a criminal court. What you are saying in a criminal court is that, if you do it successfully, you are meeting the burden of that this occurred beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't mean there can't be doubt. It doesn't mean that it's not less than 100%. It just means that it is beyond that sort of movable target that is reasonable doubt. The only doubts remaining are unreasonable, or are, as adjudicated by a group of your peers, unreasonable. Okay, but that's in the court world. In real life, we don't need facts. We just impute regardless. We just throw imputations out there. And that becomes a real problem, especially when we start to base our actions in response to an occurrence off of that intent that we've imputed to another party. We need a reason something happened, and we've developed a reason, and then we've developed a series of actions off of that. Let's take our text message example again. They did not respond. Well, they must have chosen not to respond. Why would they choose not to respond? Well, some of the more reasonable answers get thrown out almost immediately. They were busy. They quite honestly saw it and just missed responding to it. They're a disorganized cat. Yeah, most people are disorganized cats. Well, it must be that they don't like me. Okay, well, how do we follow that down? Well, if they don't like me, I don't like them. Well, what does that result in? You see where I'm going with this. And that's a silly example. But in the lay world, we impute intent almost all the time. And we do it on larger scale and on larger scale items that lead to some pretty radical and rough conclusions, and that lead us to do things that we wouldn't necessarily want to do if we weren't imputing this intent, rather than saying, hey, I should really just, maybe ask, hey, why'd you do that? I should just ask, hey, why'd you do that? Instead, we impute intent and we go from there. It's problematic because you're jumping to a conclusion. And jumping to a conclusion is never good, particularly in a world where we don't really spend enough time trying to understand each other anyway. So take a little time today. If something happened and you're trying to figure out why it happened, if it involves somebody else, maybe just ask. Try and figure out, hey, why'd you do that? What they might say is, I didn't even realize I did that. I'm so sorry. Now, if somebody bumps into you when you're trying to get your coffee together, what you can impute is that perhaps they're distracted. But you can't impute that they're an angry, selfish son. They're an angry, selfish son of a bitch. Just something to keep in mind. Have a little grace with the world. Try not to impute intent to anybody around you. It'll make your day happier, and, maybe you'll treat some people in the world a little bit better today. Anyways, that's my not important 10 minutes. Well, actually, we're at 11 minutes, so I'll leave you with that. I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. Have a nice day.